Jake, the interdimensional ship's radar is picking up something irregular. Come take a look.
The ship's having a hard time getting a read. It's like it's reconfiguring constantly.
Do you think? Could it be?
A quantum.
Let's veer in for a closer look.
What you looking at? Why you talking back?
Welcome to Decision Space, the only show to take place right here, in the space between the turns in your favorite games. I'm Jake Friedman.
And I'm Brendan Hansen.
And this is the podcast about decisions in games.
And in today's episode, we're talking about Quantum, a 2012 sort of cult hit in some ways. This is a game that came out to, I would say, medium popularity in 2012. And it has had a long tail with a lot of people being interested in this game. It's chock full of neat ideas, and it plays a lot different. It's quite unique in the way that it's sort of formulated and plays, but it feels familiar in an interesting way. So it's one I'm very excited to deep dive with you on the show today, Jake.
Yeah, I can't wait to talk about this. I think people who know this game are obviously going to be excited to hear this, but I think people who are not familiar with Quantum might still get a lot out of this just because of how, I want to say this game almost feels like foundational in the way its mechanics work. Like they're so stripped down that I think there's a lot to take away from this just from like a game design learning perspective.
Yeah, totally. Well, should we do what we always do and get right into our ratings and reviews, the least important part of the show up front, so that people can get to the heart of the interesting discussion on the back end with some insight into where we're coming at the game, the perspective we're coming at it from.
Not so fast, Brendan. Before we get into that, I have to jump in from the editor's studio to say, hooray! We have been nominated for a Golden Geek Award for Best Podcast over at BoardGameGeek.com. Thank you so much to everyone who took the time to vote for us and get us to this stage. It is a huge honor to be considered alongside some truly amazing and deserving shows and have Decision Space as a nominee in a category that is just full of endless talent, passion, and quality that extends far beyond this list of nominees. As a board game podcast listener, we are truly spoiled. Nevertheless, if you would like to vote for us, we would love to have your vote. It would mean the world to be selected as a finalist this year or even win. To vote, you have to go over to BoardGameGeek.com to cast your ballot. I'll include a link to that in the description of this podcast. Oh, and one more announcement. Brendan and I have decided we'll be updating our top 10 games of all time lists, so look out for that episode next week. Okay, back to the show. I can jump in first with mine. I'll be honest, this game, I had a difficult time coming up with my rating for it. I'm going to settle on a 6.5, which is kind of low. And the reason for that is I played a lot of this game, had a lot of fun with it, but it's not one I'm itching to get back to playing. It is a game that I feel like I learned a lot from. So it's almost a game I would recommend more as like a game design learning tool than a game I'd recommend to you just to have like a super fun game night with your friends. Though certainly it would be that too for a lot of people. So for me, Quantum, 6.5 out of 10. It's a fun game, but it's not one, and it's one I would play again if somebody was like really eager to get it to the table, but it's not one that I'm going to be, foisting onto my groups anytime soon.
Seeking out the out of print copy that cost over $100, not on the table right now.
Caveat that all to hell in that because this is out of print, I haven't played this on the table. So this is purely impressions based on the Board Game Arena implementation. That's important to a lot of our listeners. So yeah, keep that in mind as we talk about this game.
The same is true for me as well. And I will say, Quantum is a pulpy romp chock full of great ideas, executed well, that mostly don't disappoint. There's nice guardrails designed into the game to force each play towards an exciting conclusion that work most of the time, and an interesting and fun combos tied to the game's special powers that almost always feel great. Quantum is a great game that I hope gets its Empire Strikes Back style sequel someday. 8 out of 10. I think this game's just a lot of fun, but there's some rough edges.
There's so many qualifiers in your game review. I thought you were going to be like, and at the end of the day, it's a game that I almost enjoy playing.
No, I really enjoy it, despite all the qualifiers. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, should we jump right into the game background?
Yeah, so this Quantum's interestingly a 2012 release from FunForge, so it's over a decade old, but it doesn't feel that way to me when I sort of sat down to play it. Its rule system feels really tight and sort of it's easy to get at. It's a very fully realized game in its design, and it's designed by Eric Zimmerman. Eric Zimmerman is a game design, a game studies scholar. He works or historically worked at the NYU Game Center in New York, I know, and wrote a really foundational game studies text called Rules of Play in 2003 with Katie Salen. And I've mentioned this on the show before, but I'll say it here really quickly. Frequent listeners of the show will know we'll throw around the term magic circle kind of frequently on the show to talk about the sort of shared social contract that we all end up entering into when we sit down to play a game together. It's not something when you literally talk about, right, when you sit down to play, but it's a headspace that as game players, we all enter into. Rules of Play, Eric Zimmerman's book in 2003 with Katie Salen, really repopularized this idea. It's a Johan Huizinga idea, this other scholar from a long time ago, but they really brought it back into the modern lexicon of game design and sort of said, we should talk about this. Let's talk about magic circles, and it's an important part of game playing. So Quantum is Eric's sort of most successful board game, I think. But he also has a lot of computer games that he's designed and other sort of digital games as well.
Yeah, awesome. And it's interesting knowing that he has that background as literally a scholar of game studies, because I think the game design that comes from him here it almost has like a scholarly, like professorial vibe to it, which we'll get into a bit more what I mean by that when we get into the mechanisms of the game in the deep dive section.
Yeah. Awesome. I'll also say really quickly, if anyone's curious, Eric Zimmerman, a recent idea that he's been talking a lot about is the ludic century, this idea that the 21st century will be designed by games. So if you're curious, just
Defined by games?
Defined by games. The game playing will completely define how humans kind of approach solving problems and just will shape the entire century in a way as an art form.
That's like really exciting and cool, and also just very funny and optimistic coming from somebody who's obviously incredibly passionate about games and game playing. Like, yeah, wouldn't that be great? It's like a car salesman being like, "Yep, it's going to be the century of the car."
But last century it was.
That's right.
Cool. Should we dive into it?
Let's do the rules overview and meet back on the other side for our deep dive discussion.
Quantum is a dice-driven space combat game for 2 to 4 players played on a modular grid board of tiles depicting planets that the players vie for control over to win the game. Here's the hook. Player ships are represented by dice, and their attack power is inversely proportional with their movement. So, value 1 ships are slow. They can only move 1 space per turn, but incredibly powerful in combat. They're battle stations. In contrast, 6 value dice are lightning quick. They can move 6 spaces when they move, but they're the least adept at combat in the game. They're your nimble scouts. Each value die also has a special power associated with it that can be used once per turn. 1s get a free attack on an adjacent space. 2s are transport ships and can transport other ships on the board, and so on. Each player begins the game with a set of quantum cubes, and the goal of the game is to be the first player to place all of your quantum cubes onto planets on the board. There are 2 ways to accomplish this: having ships, dice, orthogonal to a planet with combined values totaling the value of the planet, and using a construct action, or 2, winning enough battles to gain infamy, allowing the player to place 1 quantum cube onto any planet on the board in which they don't already have a cube. Turns use an action point system. Players have 3 actions to take each turn and can do any combination of the following: move or attack another player's ship. Combat is resolved by rolling combat dice alongside their ships and adding the player's ship value to the die they rolled. The lowest value between those 2 players wins. Construct a cube to a planet for 2 actions. You can also reconfigure a ship to re-roll it. If you don't want your ship to be a 5, you can simply use an action and re-roll it and see what it comes out as. Deploy a ship to the board that was previously destroyed in battle, or research to gain 1 value on a player's research die. When a player's research die reaches 6, or when a player adds a quantum cube to the board, they gain access to a special power card that gives them either an immediate action or a new ability which changes the way they can play the game, giving each play a ton of variety. Play continues with each player taking turns until a player places their final quantum cube onto the board, at which point they're crowned the victor.
Brendan, thank you so much for taking the time to record that rules overview. Hopefully, it gives people a better sense about how to play the game. So, what do we say? We recalibrate and get into the discussion and start by characterizing the overall decision space in Quantum.
So this is something we do every episode when we deep dive a game, where we talk about the size and depth of decision space, what type it is, what's the sort of feel of playing this game, what's the clarity of the decision space? Is there a lot of uncertainty, or is it fairly certain? Are your actions fairly deterministic once you decide to make them? And this can be an interesting one to characterize, Jake. We always like to start with size and depth, and I think Quantum, just given the number of possible actions on your turn, and also the number of cards that can come into play, the different combos you can pull together, it's just a fairly large decision space in terms of the things that you could do on any given turn. And oftentimes there's a lot of branching paths within that decision tree because there's so much uncertainty from, especially driven by the combat, right? Or even by the decision to reconfigure your ship, right? I talk about that in the rules overview. Every turn you have 3 action points, and as one of your actions, you can just re-roll one of your ships. Oh, I don't want my ship to be a 1 anymore. It can't move and there's nothing around it to fight. Let me re-roll it. So it's a pretty big decision space, and I think to me it feels fairly deep, but it's not massive. It's not endlessly deep. It's not infinitely deep, I don't think.
Yeah, and it should be noted that the decision space is restrained by the fact that you have just 3 actions.
Yeah.
But like that being said, you get 1 action in chess, and that's a game that has a pretty big decision space.
Totally. Yeah.
So I think that's kind of like jumping down to feel.
Sure.
I feel like this game has almost like a chess-like decision space on the board, where you want to be thinking multiple moves ahead to try and position yourself for opportunities to score, or opportunities to get the dominance rating up on future turns. I think that skilled Quantum players are going to be doing a good job of that sort of thinking ahead. And also, the other thing that lends to that chess-like feel of the game is it is a game that gives the sense that there are optimal plays out there, and you just need to study the board long enough and intensively enough to find them, and that making a misstep can lead to you being severely punished, right? Like, oh crap, I didn't see that player, our friend Luke, he had the route to victory on his turn by using like a combination of actions and ability cards. I could have stopped him if I saw it, but I didn't see it. That has like this feeling of like hanging your rook or something in chess.
I completely hear everything you're saying, and it has all of the drippings of a tactical combat game, like tactical strategic combat game, and I love those types of games, which I think chess kind of is the original inspirer of a lot of those games. But at the same time, Jake, I think some turns too, the right decision is just like, oh, I'm supposed to run my 5 into that person's 2 and hope I roll a 1 and they roll a 6,
100%.
Yeah.
But I think this game is, a bucket that can hold both of those things.
Yeah. No, completely. And in talking about the feel, the decision space to me feels so open. And because you're sort of a lot of your decisions, the combat is so important to the game, right? The combat is going to get you closer to both of the winning outcomes. Combat typically is going to get you closer to having the position you need to construct on a planet, or to sort of be defensively positioned where no one's going to come mess with you. Usually it's not wise to kind of roll up and try to construct on a planet if someone's within attacking distance of you. So you typically have to win a combat on your way to getting into orbital position to drop a quantum cube, construct a quantum cube onto a planet. Or maybe you're just going with a strategy where you've picked up a couple of the special power cards like the Ferocious, or I don't remember some of the other names. Ferocious gives you +2 to your die rolls, but there's another one that sort of gives you...
There's a lot that just increase your combat ability.
Yeah. So maybe I'm just going to be fighting. I sort of forgot where I was going with this, but to me, so much of it is about the feel of it is that there's all of these open strategic paths, but because there's so much uncertainty, in my mind, I don't always feel like I have to find the exact right answer. I feel like I just have to find about good enough of an answer and then feel confident in it in a way that I don't have the same flexibility in chess, right? In chess, I need to be almost certain. And here, I feel
I would push back just a little bit in that I think this game is dynamic. I think that's kind of the type of decision space we're
Absolutely.
working with,
Yep.
where, what you could do on your turn starts really small, right? You're just going to be deploying ships. And then it feels like very often people take similar kind of setup first plays where they expand to their next nearby planet and drop a cube, construct a cube on it as early as possible. Ideally, you can even do that on your first turn of the game after the setup. And I think in the early stages of the game, and I don't know enough about chess to say this, but at least at lower than master chess level, just doing like reasonably good plays early is fine. But then the game starts to tighten up. There are fewer available places left where you could reasonably construct a cube. You have fewer routes to victory, and people are closer to winning. And then is when I think it starts to have the sense of pressure of
Find a solution. Yeah.
I have to find a way that I can put myself in position to win on the next turn,
Yeah.
unless somebody stops me, or I have to find a way to make sure this person, like, what is the best route to give myself the best chance of winning a combat so that the next person to go doesn't win on their turn. And that's when I think it starts feeling more important to find the best possible line.
Totally. I will say, I think that is the common quantum opening, just like scooting, re-rolling your starting chips once, scooting the planet closer to you. But I really like games where I start, if we're just playing on the normal 9x9, the sort of like basic map, start with 2 5s and you try to sneak into the middle and put a quantum cube down in the middle on your second turn. That can feel like a really powerful start, because oftentimes that middle planet is so key at the very end. So you can kind of invert your path.
That's cool.
Yeah, sort of risk reward there is fun. Though
I like it when you got a 2 and a 5 or a 6, and then you can use the 2 to transport
yeah,
and drop and like construct literally on your first turn.
yeah, that
That's
feels
like my
amazing.
ideal thing. Yeah.
Super efficient. Okay, so you sort of said that for type, you feel like it's a dynamic decision space. I completely agree. Just because this game, maybe more than any of the games than a lot of games we cover on the show, the shape of the game is just going to vary so much, and the nature of the decision space really is, right? A lot of times, games that we cover have pretty similar arcs, and Quantum certainly can have that. But you can also have games where you get blown off the mat, off the board really early, manage to scrape your way back in, redeploy all your ships, and have a chance of coming back into it because other people are sort of squabbling and leave space for you to get back in. And based on the special powers that you have, what you're doing can really vary. You can have games where you end up with a combo where you're just trying to research, because all of a sudden, instead of having to get to 6 as your threshold, you just have to get to 4 to get more special powers, to get more gambits and whatever the other ones are called. They're sort of the tactical actions, and then the powers that
Upgrades.
Yeah, thank you. And I've played a game where I sort of got that, and plundering and precocious, you sort of take one ship off the board, you get 3, do 1 research, and then you're sort of juggling upgrades turn after turn. And I think that one thing I love about Quantum is almost every game can feel really different, while all still building to a climactic conclusion typically.
Yeah. I think this is the first point I want to point out, something that feels very academic, like an opportunity to learn about how games work with Quantum, which is that, as you mentioned, you get to choose the different setup of the game. The standard is the 3x3 grid, but you could have many more planet tiles, or you could have fewer. And that will, playing this game with just 4 tiles, then 9 tiles, then 16 tiles, will give you a, if when we talk about decision space, you don't understand, or like type of decision space, feel of decision space, if that feels opaque to you, I think playing this game those 3 ways will give you a really good sense of what exactly it is we're talking about when we say a board game is more than just here's the theme, here's the mechanics, here's the art. Okay, what do we think about it? It's the decision space is like the way that those things all come together to create a unique play experience.
Mm-hmm.
And here we have 3 different play experiences that have all kinds of different tempo. They feel like, the first game is, en media res, right? Where there's almost no build up. We're fighting right away. We're all in each other's face. The second has kind of a natural kind of curving, ramping up in excitement. And the third, the big board, has like a huge crescendo, right? It's like a slow build up. Everybody's able to start moving around the board. There's way more time to collect powers, and then perhaps that gives you, the sense of like an epic feel at the end. And all of them, it's the exact same game, the exact same mechanisms, the exact same theme, the exact same art, but they're gonna create a totally different feel of decision space as you play each
Yeah.
one.
And the game, interestingly, invites you to make your own, which is pretty cool. There's a whole community of Quantum players online who have made maps and published them for other people to see that are on Board Game Geek and elsewhere if you're curious about taking a look. I think, Jake, when we're having this conversation, just to give us a through line, given how different all those things feel, do you think it's fair to say we're mostly talking about the 3x3, kind of the standard map?
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I would also say, just for point of reference, my favorite way to play Quantum by far are the quicker ways.
Like the
So
smallest or the 3x3?
the smallest are the three. I think the 3x3 is solid,
Yeah.
and that's where you start with. I think you have to get like 4 cubes out
Yep.
to win the
Yeah.
game. That feels right for me, for like the type of decision space, the type of gameplay experience I want out of this kind of game. But your mileage will vary. But that's definitely how we played it the most. I think it's kind of the most standard way of playing the game, and for my money, the best way.
Yeah, I agree that some of the bigger maps where you're trying to get 5 or even 6 cubes on, they can run a little long, can feel almost a
Exactly.
little non-interactive as you start so far away from others potentially. I've also found that non-symmetrical maps, in my experience, can be very swingy in a way that feels less balanced. There's enough uncertainty in the game that I almost want the board to feel pretty stable and even keeled.
And when you,
Playing it
I
at
was gonna say when you, sorry, you
no,
go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. You go.
And when you play on the really small boards, the 4 tile boards, that is going to create, again, I think, a sense of maybe more swinginess, because the randomness that comes in the form of the combat dice is going to be happening earlier and more often over the course of play.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Jake, is there anything in terms of characterizing the overall decision space that you feel like we want to touch on here?
I think the last thing I would say, and this is a distinction from chess, is that, at least chess as I understand it, and I always have to be careful to say that, is that like Quantum has kind of this like mathy probabilistic feel,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
You don't in a game of chess, everything's determinative. Here, I think, as you mentioned, you're thinking through different lines of play, and in those lines you'll come up with, there will be a point where you have to stop and say, if I win this combat, then I'll do this. And what's the probability that if I'm attacking with a 2 into a 4 that I'm gonna win? I don't have, I'm not playing this game with like a probability chart in front of me, but I feel like, okay, I'm probably gonna win that like 65% of the time, maybe. I don't know, maybe a little bit more. And then I'll do this and I'll attack over here. And if that's successful too, then I'll do this. Or if not, I'll do this other thing. Or if that first combat's not successful, then my second play will be to attack that with this other ship and try and win that combat. Right. So I think that is a big part of the feel of this decision space. Like, you're kind of juggling these probabilistic combats in your head. And those are all part of the lines of play that you're trying to come up with, and holding the bandwidth of all those things is kind of fun, but can also be testing for sure.
I think that a cool thing about the probabilities in this game, as you mentioned, Jake, is that just having a fuzzy idea is enough. So if
Totally.
your die is lower, that you have a better chance. It's as simple as that. And the lower your die is of your ship, the better chance you have. And that's enough that the more you play, the more you sort of intuit it. And you also know that you win ties as the attacker. So that gives you a pretty strong edge. That's a big probability jump. And it's encouraging you to interact with the other players and to seek out combat in a way that is fun. Also, when you win a combat, a lot of fun stuff typically happens. You get to move your domination die up once. There's a chance that if that got to 6, you're going to get a new special power. You get to knock someone else's die off the board, and you can get a free movement more or less out of it sometimes,
Yeah.
which can feel very good. There's a lot of incentives to engage. So I think that's part of the feel too. It's a game inviting you to seek out and roll some dice against one another. And then the other thing, I think in terms of the feel, my final thing that I want to say that leans into what you were saying, Jake, about at times the turns of Quantum can feel really puzzly. We obviously know that action point systems just make games feel puzzly. If you're going to give someone 3 actions and 5 options of what they could do, some of which are zero cost actions that they can use their ship's abilities for free once per turn. It's almost like you have three. It's sort of like you have 5 action points a lot of times when you're playing Quantum, not just 3, because you're going to take 2 special ability actions on your ships usually on average. I found not always, but sometimes. So your turns can get really puzzly because some of the abilities interact with other ships. For example, one of my favorite ships is the 3. The 3 lets you swap the location of one ship with another. So it's nice because you can extend really far with, say, a 5 or a 6, which have all this movement potential, and then swap in a 3 and then attack with it. So there's lots of puzzly sort of stringing togethers of actions that you can do, and that even you can layer on other actions when you get new abilities from some of the upgrade cards that really take that to a new level. And I think that's where a lot of the puzzliness that you're feeling there too comes in, Jake.
Hmm. Absolutely. I think we should jump next to talking about the way the dice work for movement and combat. And I'm sure this is something that you brought up in the rules overview, but I just think that is such a clean mechanism and it goes such a far way in just kind of explaining like how the game
Yeah,
works, if
it's the
that
hook
makes
of the
sense.
game by far, right? This is the most thematic abstract game I've ever played. It was clearly designed from the point of view of, oh, what if your movement and your combat power were intrinsically linked? Low value means you're strong in combat but can't move far. High value means you're nimble, you can move really quickly, but you're not great at combat. Boom. It's elegant, it's clean, and it leads to this really interesting decision space that I think you're right. You can teach it really easily. And I think later in this episode, we'll talk about sort of the theming of this game because in a lot of ways, it's brilliant. I think it's one of the best examples I've seen of someone theming a game that could have otherwise been really bland and uninteresting and gives everything this extra flair that allows you to create a story in your head. I never thought I'd be so excited about this game. Makes me excited about seeing a 1 and being able to imagine like, oh, this is my battle station next to this planet. How can I make that matter in terms of having a
Right.
1 here on the board?
It's just so good, right? Like a 1, all that's the only representation you get, right? These aren't
Just a
like
1.
custom dice
Yeah.
or anything. It's just 1 pip, and it just behaves exactly like you would expect your
A battle
massive
station. Yeah.
battle station to behave, right? You
Yep.
can only move 1 space, but if anybody gets next to you, they're
Yeah.
toast, you know?
Completely.
And you can just control space on the board just by being like in the vicinity. Like people just naturally, because of the way the incentives work, right? They're steering clear because as long as I'm 3 away from your 1 or whatever, I feel pretty good about my chances of avoiding it. So, it just, again, yeah, the theme is so great. And I just think, in terms of, yeah, teaching the game, right? It's just everything with the movement and combat is just so incredibly intuitive that feels to me like the hero mechanism
Yeah.
here. That's kind of like everything else. It feels like it's kind of on top of that.
I think that also we tend to really enjoy games that give you multiple sort of player pieces, player avatars within a given space, right? So in Broom Service, that's a game with you get 2 pawns on the board, which increases the decisions you have. Here, you start with 3 ships, and you can get even more. They could be knocked off the board too. But something I love about the dice system, Jake, is it feels like you have this little squadron of ships, but you actually care about which ships you have, and there's no way you couldn't just say, oh, you just want to have all threes. Threes are the best ship. Obviously, threes are the
Right.
best ship, right?
Yeah.
The game is about having the right ships in the right places at the right time in the game. And I think that creates a way more interesting decision space because usually early on, you want to start with sort of quick ships that let you seek out and take territory quickly. But if you extend too far and you make yourself weak to people who have ships that they rolled with more middling values and they get some nice combats on you, that could really set you back. But you also, as you go into sort of maybe locations where more quantum cubes are on the board, you're really going to benefit from if you're dialing in on one planet and you need to defend your ability to construct on that planet, you're going to want lower value ships. I don't know. I think the system works really, really well. And it's held together in some ways by giving each of these ships a special ability, right? I think that something instinctually feels to me, right, where this grid of this grid board that you're playing on and just the abstract game at face value, that you you need these special powers almost to sort of justify not wanting the extremes in some cases, right? Where a 6 is almost in some ways just better than a 5 for at movement. So you need this like other little twist to like make it feel like a 5 is better. I don't know if I'm getting that out as clearly as I want it to be, but I feel like the game really benefits from having these knobs to add extra texture of why these different values matter rather than just being linear 1 to 6 and making me care about that's my 3. I really care about my 3.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think a lot of the intrigue and puzzliness of the game comes out of the special actions you can do with your dice, right? That is sort of the puzzle. I have these dice, they can each move like this, and they're this good in combat. And on top of that, they all have these types of special powers. Like
Yeah,
those are the ingredients that you're gonna, cook up in a stew and create your turn.
totally.
So I think that for me is the value of these special action is like that's what's adding like texture and interest to the puzzle that the game is asking you to solve. And I do think without the ability for a 2 to be able to pick up another ship on top of it and then move and then drop that ship off, or the ability for the 4 to transform itself into a 5 or a 3, it would feel just a little too straightforward. And I think the game already to me feels like a little bit too much, just a touch, just a smidge, and not say I didn't enjoy it as like a math exercise.
Mhm.
And I think that without those special powers, right, that is even more in your face about how like hope you all did your statistics and probabilities classes and have that fresh in your mind if you want to do
I think
well.
too, without the special powers, what I was trying to get at in part is dice like the 1. While it would still be good, it would be nowhere near as good if you didn't have a way to swap it potentially halfway across the map.
Right,
If it
100%.
couldn't attack twice, part of the reason we're so terrified of it is it can sit there and it can attack once and do a free strike action, right? And attack again. That makes it even more threatening. And I think these things really gave Eric Zimmerman enough knobs to adjust the feel of the game and the tempo and the flow of the game and get it just right. Should we talk about each of them really quickly? Each of
Yeah,
the ship
sure.
abilities? Because I think if we're talking about game design exercises, and if this is playing one, this is sort of interesting. So we alluded to the first one. A 1 value dice is just a battle station. So its special ability that you can use for free once per turn is you can attack the space next to the battle station directly. Just a free extra attack. So that's great.
Yeah, super strong. And yeah, again, like it thematically adds to the battle station like pressure on the
Yep.
board as well. 2 is the flagship. So I just mentioned that can pick up and transport another ship. This is really, I think this can lead to some of the most like puzzly turns as you're trying to like navigate where to move and then where to drop off. So it gives you a ton of ability to like change your entire setup on the board. And often with that, you're thinking about putting your other ships into orbital positions, but also like taking things out of or into comfortable ranges for you and your opponent.
You
So like often a turn will be like, okay, I'll put this over here so that on my next turn I'll be able to move that into the orbital position, but also I'm out of range of Brendan's ships on the other side of the
Yeah.
planet.
You can create with a flagship neat choke points where you sort of have the high value dice that you need to get into orbital position behind them. And you're sort of leading with your flagships in a way that feels really thematic and interesting. It just works really well. I do think that the flagships, Jake, for me, are some of the toughest dice ships to use really well. These feel the most skill testing to me. And also from a learning and complexity level, there's a lot more rules baggage that comes with these. You can pick them up from any of the surrounding spaces. Whereas we keep saying orbital position, that really just means orthogonally adjacent to the middle of each tile. Each tile
I
itself,
think that was
it
clear.
was clear-ish.
I'm just kidding.
I said it in the rules overview too, but I think that it adds this little layer of complexity that makes this game. It needs this complexity. It's good, but the flagship is one of the areas where it adds it. So the 3,
Also,
oh
I was just gonna say on the orbital position term, the fact that we're saying that at all and not saying like next to a planet,
yeah,
which I think is kind of our tendency on
yeah,
this
yeah. We
show,
abstract, yeah.
we're actually using the terms is speaks to the thematic integration of this game.
I cannot believe with just a bunch of dice chucking around, I feel like I'm playing a Star Combat game, and I am. It's
Yeah.
so well themed. So the Destroyer is a 3. It's really adept in combat, right? It's on the bottom half of the values you could have, but it also warps. So you can swap places with one of your ships on the map. I think the 3 is my favorite ship to have. It's so flexible. It's so powerful. It's good in combat. It can lead to really big swings where you're moving low value dice around the map. You can dramatically shift the whole board. So these are the quote destroyers.
If you think twos are the most challenging, I think threes are the
You
most
think so?
challenging. I yeah, I just have a hard time with them because they are strong, but they're not the strongest.
Mm,
So it's not as clear when to go in with with them with combat. And also, I find myself you don't want a bunch of threes.
no, but
They're not good in duplicates where a lot of the other ones are.
sure.
Yeah.
Okay, the next ship, Jake, what is
Yeah.
it?
Am I going to say
Yeah,
it?
yeah, what is it?
For the frigate, it can modify and change into either a 3 or a 5. So you can ticket one up or one down. But then notably, you won't be able to. I can't turn it into a 3 and then
Turn it
use
back into a
that
4.
warp
Oh, sure.
in the same turn. But I love fours. They're so flexible. I
Yeah.
mean, it just gives you a feeling of more agency in a game where you don't always
Yep.
feel as though you have a ton of agency, especially when it comes to what number of or what dice values you have. And for that reason, they're one of the most effective at constructing because you can put them into
Mm.
position to construct. And then if I have a 4 sitting on a space, that gives me so much flexibility for what other ships I can bring in and still reach the necessary sum to construct.
I think that 4s are really smart from a game design perspective too, because they give you some smoothing to the reconfigure action. So reconfigure is this action that you can take right at any point on your turn where you re-roll one of the dice, one of your ships, just anywhere on the board. And you have a 1/6 chance of getting what you want, independent of if there are frigates in the game. With frigates, you actually, if you want a 3, 4, or a 5, no, that's not true. If you want a 3 or a 5, your odds go up to being 1/3 of the time you're going to get what you want, assuming you have the ability, right? Because if you roll a 4, you can modify that into a 5. If you roll a 4, you can modify that into a 3. So if you're ever rolling for a 3 or a 5, you actually have a 1/3 chance, assuming you still have an ability to use. And I think that smooths the game out and makes it easier to get those orbital position values that you need in a way that takes what could be the most frustrating part of the game, right? I'm in orbital position. I just can't get the values I need. Let me sit here and roll. It's not the most fun. It's this like chunky speed bump of output randomness that's supposed to give people time to interact with me, but I just like want the thing I want. This helps it make it a little bit less frustrating. And I think that's really great.
Yeah, I didn't notice that interaction when I was playing the game, but it does make sense. And how often are you using the reconfigure action on your
I mean,
turn in general?
ideally as little as possible, but
Yeah, ideally
occasionally you
never.
have to, right? Occasionally you get into orbital position, the ships on the board just aren't going to be there, and you need to re-roll. I would say maybe 1 out of 4 turns, 1 out of 5 turns. Sounds like more than you.
Yeah. Yeah, probably. I mean, I think it sounds more to me. Maybe I'm wrong. That'd be my guess. But yeah, it's the only action you can take that isn't
Advancing your
advancing
position. Yeah.
your position. It's definitely an action that needs to exist
Yep.
because otherwise you could get into a position where you're just stuck. It can also lead to really exciting moments. Again, I think this is probably an action that's a lot more fun on the table where you might be in a position where I win if I roll a 6 exactly,
Yep.
which you don't really get that excitement online as much. But yeah, it's definitely not one I'm excited about. And when I do take it, I'm often left feeling wanting. Like, dang it, I didn't get what I needed, or I rolled. If you roll the exact same thing, you can roll it again once more or
I
something.
think
So
so.
there's
Yeah.
some smoothing with it. But yeah, like I hope I get a 4 or 5 or a 6, and you roll your 2, and it turns into a 1. Like shit.
Yeah. Oftentimes, too, because of the way dominance works, dominance is the thing where if you win enough combats, right? Whenever you win a combat, your dominance die goes up by 1. If you lose, it goes down by 1. If you get to 6, you gain infamy and you add a quantum cube to a planet. So it's this sort of alternate path you can use to advance your victory. It means that sometimes when you have lower value ships, it just makes sense to try to get into combats and have them knocked off the map and automatically re-roll for free. Then you still have to deploy them. But sometimes your time spent better elsewhere rather than reconfiguring because you can set someone else in their plans back if you win a combat. Okay, so the next ship is the 5. The 5 is the Interceptor. These are the stealthy fighters of your squadrons. these can travel diagonally. So that's kind of hard to wrap your mind around at first, but essentially they just get to, instead of just traveling orthogonally, you can move and attack diagonally. So these are, scouts seem like they're the fastest, but they're actually not. Fives are actually the most nimble ships. They make it anywhere on the map super fast, and they can get into combats with I would say ships that have overextended fairly easily. I like fives. I think fives are quite nice. They're good comeback ships if you need to
Yeah.
trust in your dice.
Yeah, fives are great, and especially when you're playing on the standard board
Yeah.
or smaller, it basically feels like you can just get anywhere at any time with the
Yeah,
five.
this feels like the X-wing.
Yeah, totally. So that's really fun. And then lastly is six, the scout, which is the weakest in combat, has the most natural movement, though as we said, it can't get as far as the fives in most cases. And you get a free re-roll, a free reconfigure on your turn, which is nice because sixes are in many cases the weakest ship, and just sort of sitting there as a juicy target for somebody else. They can be really helpful for constructing if you need a high sum in order to construct there. Obviously a great play would be construct with the six and then reconfigure your six so that it's not sitting there in the middle of the map as a six for somebody to come along and pick it off. But yeah, generally sixes feel not the best to have, I would say.
Yeah. I like to see maybe a6 in my opening dice sometimes, because that will pop, you plop it on the map, you can put
Yeah.
it in one of the back slots on your planet, zip out, and then just reconfigure it and hope for a low value. So you kind of take territory and then quantum it into something new.
The other nice thing about a six is you can attack somebody with a six and then reconfigure it. So, like
Oh, if you lose, yeah.
if you
Take a
lose, right?
risky combat. If you
Yeah,
lose the
right. So
outcome,
if I
yeah.
attack your three with my six, my chance of winning isn't great. But if I roll a one and you roll a five, I've done it. But maybe I just need to move into that part of the board anyway for some reason, or
Yeah.
so I can take a big swing, and then if I'm unsuccessful, I still get a chance of reconfiguring, so you aren't getting like an easy, super free attack
That's another
on your next
incentive
turn.
for combat too, is that your ship doesn't get knocked off the map if you lose. Only
Unless
on
they
the
have
attack.
like some kind of special upgrade.
Right. Or what about the upgrade where you just don't roll, you just blow up your ship and then both ships get destroyed? Do you
I think that's only on defense.
Is it? Oh, that's only on defense.
Yeah, if you get attacked, it's like you can push the self-destruct
Yeah,
button.
yeah, that one's wild. I think that happened to you in a game, Jake, and you were like, "What just happened?" Maybe that's
Yeah,
called
it's like why?
dangerous. Yeah,
Yeah, why would you do that? Yeah, which is again, right? So much of what we're talking about here is just exciting and interesting ways that dice can be used,
yeah,
right? And this does it however you like it,
hmm
right? It has, you can use it as a random output
yeah,
generator, but you can also use it to represent different things. And in this case, the thing that it's representing is representing multiple things, right?
yeah.
Both its movement and its power and its ability on the board.
And dice are trackers for your research and your dominance. They just tick up, right? They're counters. The game is also elegantly balanced around 6 in terms of you want your research and your dominance to get to 6. Somehow it just all works.
Yeah. So that's really nice. But I think the game then when we move into sort of some of the upgrades, I don't know if we want to talk about them now, or if we have something else, but then feels as though, and I thought about this when you talked about the, dangerous one or whatever, where the upgrades are interesting because they're playing more in your personal decision space,
Yeah.
right? They're playing more in changing your incentives as a player. Okay, now I want to be more fighty or I want to be more researchy because I'm getting a little bit, better efficiency when I do those things or better odds when I do those things. But then they can also, the good thing about dangerous isn't that your ships die. It's that people are less likely to attack you because you could just take their ships
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. Let's talk about the powers. I think the powers are really cool. They are one of my favorite things about this game. There's two types, right? We've talked about there's these command cards which kind of give you unique strategic paths, so they're change an ability that you have, or they'll give you a passive where in combat you subtract one, say you're ferocious, so you get a combat bonus and you subtract one from your combat die whenever you attack or defend. And then there's the gambits, which are single use cards that instead of being an ongoing effect, it's a one-time thing. And these are, you get a new ship to add on the board. You can relocate someone's quantum cube. That's incredibly powerful, but always feels so bad to me to be the one who's using it unless you're in the lead, because you give up so much of your potential just to hurt someone else. There's aggression, where you just get to increase your dominance by 2. That one to me is pretty cool and useful. Momentum, take 2 more actions, or the sabotage card, where you can make everyone else discard a command. So those are typically much more interactive in nature. And then the commands are these special powers that you can string together. And I think there's real and legitimate combos here. And there's some cards that you really, really want, and other cards that I don't like taking.
Yeah, it does feel weird to me, and I think part of the weirdness of the apparent imbalance in some of the cards is just that in different setups of the game, certain cards are going to be better or
Right.
worse.
Yeah.
Right. So the gambits in general are just going to be better on average in
Any
quicker
situation.
games.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
When you're playing to fewer quantum cubes to win, then you have less time to, get efficiency off any given upgrade card. So often it's like, well, I'll just take the 2 dominance because, this game's only going to last a few turns.
Yeah.
Right. So, and I think similarly, right, based on the game you're playing, there are certain things like I'm looking at them now, but a lot of times I am really reticent to take the ones that are helping me with research, because the research is just going to get me more upgrades. It's not really helping me get points to win the game. I think that's good to get a research one early if we're playing in a really long game, but definitely not on a short one.
That's really interesting. I feel like I've had games where I get a couple research powers early on, and I'm able to string them together to use those to get the powers that will win me the game. So Quantum has this thing where if you end up with more than 3 command cards, you have to discard one. But so you can tactically take the gambit cards, the ones that give immediate effect, if you've stacked these research cards to give you this sort of snowballing, and then switch into the command cards that will help you win the game towards the end. But you're probably right, Jake. Do you have a favorite of the command cards? One that you just like to play if you can get early?
Yes. I like the energetic, I think, which is one that allows my ship to move more than
Yep.
once. That can be just really tricky. I think it's especially good late game just because it feels like we haven't talked about this much, and we really need to before we get to the end of the episode about the group dynamics that exist in this magic circle. But often the end game state ends up with multiple people teetering right around the victory point. So all you're doing on your turn is trying to, if you can't win, you're trying to put yourself in position where you'll be able to win the next turn.
Yeah.
And having energetic allows you to just have so much more range on ships that perhaps you could put yourself in a position much easier where you could construct on one of 2 planets or with, different setups of ships. Or perhaps somebody just misses that you had that, and they're like, "Oh, dang! I didn't realize he could have moved that 2 all the way over
Yeah.
here."
I really like the card. Obviously, you can't take this in all situations, because I don't think it's ever the right decision to take this if if you've not already met the condition of the card. But Conformist, this is the card that gives you an extra action for matching ships. So if 2 or more of your ships on the map have the same number at the start of your turn, you get to take one extra action. I found that card can be really powerful. I also
That's really good.
Yeah, it's super fun. And then I also like the card Intelligent. This is the one that lets you construct on a planet with an orbital value 1 higher or 1 lower than the planet's number. So you can kind of fudge it. I found that gives you a lot more. It seems like a small effect, but in practice, it's massive in terms of the turns it can save you.
Totally. I like basically all of them, and I think this is just my play style that help make constructing
Easier.
easier or quicker.
Yeah.
So anything that helps with movement, anything that helps giving you additional actions, I like a lot. I think those are kind of There's basically 3 paths, right? One is things that help you with upgrades, which is something I cast aside. Then the second is like movement, movement is just great because it helps with everything, right? It
Mhm.
helps with construct, but it also can help you with combat. And then there are ones that are just explicitly helping you with combat. So ferocious is the one we keep talking about. So ferocious is actually, I think we got it wrong. That's the one where you subtract 1 from your combat value, so it just makes you better in every instance.
Oh, I was talking about Ravenous.
Ravenous
Yeah.
is the one where when you destroy an enemy ship, you get +2 dominance, and when one of yours gets destroyed, you get -2. So it just makes you, you win 3 combats in a single turn with Ravenous. That's a point right there.
Yep.
And when you're playing to very few number of points, that's huge. So that feels like a separate strategic path, the kind of Ravenous path that could open up for
I
you.
love these cards too because I think they're really well designed to give you interesting powers that are fun to use, but also signpost a way to play the game, like you were just saying, Jake. So you get the Ravenous ability and you see, oh, maybe I want to attack a lot, and then maybe you get the Warlight card, which says extra action for destruction. When you destroy one or more enemy ships on your turn, gain 1 extra action. It's a linear combo that goes together really well. It's completely synergistic, but when you have those 2 cards, your decision space totally warps, and I've played this way before. You almost stop thinking about how do I get in position to put quantum cubes onto planets through construction and just start playing it like a tactical combat game alone. How do I just get in there and attack people each turn? Because that's my new win condition. And usually that's enough momentum. And I think that's the fun of Quantum, is getting these little signposts and putting them together into a unique strategic path in which each game really does feel different when you play it.
It also enables you to pivot, right?
Yeah.
You start out getting a couple early constructs, and then all of a sudden that maybe that's become difficult for you just because of the type of ships you have out, or where other people have placed their cubes. Getting one of these cards, even in a relatively quicker playing version of the game, can be enough to say, okay, now I'm gonna try and get my last 2 points in a different way,
Yeah.
and that's viable too. So I think when you're saying about, just to kind of wrap up my point, what you're saying about changing the way people play, I think the signposts for players, that's the same as what I was saying earlier about these change your incentive
Yep. Totally.
for how to play the game in a really fun, exciting
To
way.
talk about one final example of what you just said, Jake, the power Stubborn. This is a card that says strong defense. When you are attacked, ties go in your favor, and you destroy your attacker if you win and gain dominance. This is, I think, a really fun card if you have it. I've had this card before where it is later in the game, and I have low value ships in the center that are never going to be enough to claim. I can never play to the center planet. It's a 10, and I only have 1s and 2s out there. And I was able to get the Stubborn card and just kind of camp in the orbital position, so people are forced to sort of attack. And it ends up really playing to your favor on your turn, where everyone at the table is sort of stuck, sort of saying, well, we need to get our cubes onto this planet, but Brendan's blocking it and has their Stubborn ability. So it creates these unique play patterns.
All right, let's finish our conversation here, which is with the magic circle that exists in this game. One of the interesting things about playing this game on Board Game Arena is that it gives you a big, bold text
As loud
that
as could
sits
be.
there above the board, impossible to miss, that says, this game is balanced around attacking the person in first place.
There's only one winner at Quantum. Losers will be equally second, i.e. last place. So team up against the leading player. That is what balances the game! Exclamation point.
A true Ricky Bobby board game. If you ain't first, you're last.
Yep. So, and I think that's just trying to really clearly say, look, yeah, there are situations that are really imbalanced that come out of this system, right? Someone can end up getting a lot of early momentum, and we are going to rely on you as the players to balance the game. This is a viable player-driven balance. Is a standby sort of way in which designers have chosen to construct games for a really long time. Cosmic Encounter, which has some of there's little pieces of Cosmic, I think, scattered throughout Quantum, and I think one of them is sort of this philosophy. It's also the special powers on all the cards, and it makes for a really political game that's trying to get you talking and interacting with one another. And I think it's interesting that a game as abstract as this, I think thematically, it wants you to care and to work together and sort of say, okay, let's band together and attack one another, which is going to really work, like you said, Jake, for some play groups and really not work for others.
I do love the fact that it says this. I think that every board game should either say this in the rules or not say it in the rules.
Don't leave it up to your groups to decide and have disagreements about what the magic circle is. Yeah.
Exactly, right? Why not just make that type of thing explicit when you're counting on it to balance the game? There are a lot of games, like you mentioned, Cosmic Encounter, Inish, games like this that are very much built around this principle that, hey, we need to whack-a-mole here, right? And I think just saying it does it takes away a little bit of the feel bad, just because, hey, we explicitly said this up front, and it eliminates any possibility of misinterpretation or misaligned expectations of, okay, well, I just thought
Cons-
that's fine if they win because I have the second most points right now.
Conspiring against your friends can feel bad, but it doesn't feel bad when you're playing a board game and the authority, the rule book and the designer give you the permission to do it, right? But you need
And
the
the
permission to do it.
yeah,
And then it feels good.
that
Jake's
that
winning.
and the true feel bad is when you're in a magic circle and it turns out that that expectation is misaligned.
Yeah.
Somebody is playing for second place where the rest of you were all committed to, playing for first at all costs.
Right.
And then that can lead to frustrations or bad feelings. So I just think it's great that it says this. For me, ultimately, this kind of group leader bashing experience is not my favorite
Yeah.
thing in games. That's just my preference, and no shade on you at all if you love games like this and Cosmic Encounter and Inish, but that's just not my jam. This actually is, of those three, by far the game that I like the most. But to me, it just feels at times like there's two possible outcomes of this game, which is, and I'm simplifying here, like one is that scenario where, oh, somebody just sneakily won because nobody saw it, which can feel good if you are that player, but it can also feel pretty unsatisfying
Yeah.
to other players. Or it feels kind of random, right? Where you're just go around a bunch of people at one away from winning. And we were able to stop Brendan, and then we were able to stop Luke. But then, just by virtue of being third in line and everybody expending resources, now I've won.
I completely agree with you, and I think that I don't always want to play games like this. It's just how I don't always want to watch movies like Star Wars. It's just not exactly always what I'm looking for, but when I am, oh, it hits, right? Like playing a game of Quantum where Bridget gets an early lead because she constructs, gets a nice power, then makes another quick construction, gets a cool combo that goes with it, and all of a sudden the table has this new dynamic where Bridget's running away with the game and we have to figure out to stop her, and it builds to this climactic conclusion, and then we sort of knock Bridget down and she's no longer the one in the lead. Now Jake's the one who's going to win, and then we stop Jake, and then it goes around the table, and then Bridget actually wins. I think that sometimes playing a game like that stays for 60 minutes, has me out of my seat because the die roll matters, can be really fun. And I think it captures something about games that I love that we don't always get to talk about when we cover games on the show. That's why I say I think this game is poised for the Hollywood remake. Give us the Empire Strikes Back of Quantum, right? It's a game that's been out of print for a long time. Bring it back. Give us this version, just cleaned up a little bit. I think it could be so good.
I totally hear what you're saying. And I think there is some real valid point you make in terms of storytelling, right? This game could tell a great story. And I think I would get more enjoyment out of that story elements playing it on the table versus online on Board Game Arena, which does have the tendency to sort of strip out some of the storytelling and elevate the mechanisms.
Totally.
And I think that is doing a disservice to what you find enjoyment here in this type of, bash the leader ending game
I think
state.
it's also, in terms of the sort of the storytelling potential of what's here, this sort of as the ludonarrative equity that you can build, as Mark Rosewater calls it, right? The ability for the game to create a meaningful story that you can then tell people about. For me, that the core system works and it helps that, but something that helps even more, and it amazes me how much this magic trick works, is just having one word on all of those card names for the special powers allows you to form an idea of what your sort of group of ships are and ideologically what they're going for in such an amazing way. It's so cool. Like you feel unique when you're scrappy and stubborn. Like, what does that mean? You get this idea of like, oh, this is what my crew's like. I don't know. This game just...
The scrappy, stubborn faction is doing different things than the flexible, stealthy faction.
Totally.
Out on the board. And
or the plundering,
I totally
ferocious faction.
Right, yeah. Absolutely. So, yeah, I think that brings us to the end of our discussion on Quantum. What a good discussion.
Yeah. Okay, wait. Final thing. Player count. Love it at
Okay.
3. Really like it at 4. At 2-player, I would love to play this with you, Jake, but I'm only playing it with you on a symmetric map. That's just play
Okay.
on the 3x3 grid. I have no interest in playing it besides that. And
I don't know. I don't think I've played it at 2. I think all of my games have been at 4.
I've played it.
I don't know that I did a good job of trying out.
I got us
different
covered
stuff
this time. It's okay. I played with Jared like 10 games back to back, and I found that, in this situation, we're going straight to Final Destination. It's the 3x3. Nowhere.
Okay.
Yeah.
No items.
No items. Yeah. No,
Box only.
In this case, I want items. I think
The
items
year is
make one way
20XX.
better. Yeah.
We only play Fox.
Yeah. Fox is the scrappy, ravenous type. Okay. I think that about settles it. If you want to join a conversation with us on Quantum and jump in, let us know what your favorite powers are. If you think there's something about the game that we missed, or there's something that we discussed that really got your gears spinning, we want to hear from you. You can find a link to our Discord in the show notes or on our website, decisionspacepodcast.com. Discord is just like a chat room that anyone can join from your browser, or it's an app that you can download on your phone. And we'd love to talk with you about this episode or any of the episodes we've made. And there's an awesome community there of people who love talking about games and decisions and what makes them fun, just like you.
Send us a review, please. Review the podcast. Tell a friend about Decision Space. And until next week, we should thank Hembry for our intro and outro song, Reach
And
Out.
thank you to all of our patrons, too, who support and make each of these shows possible. And you can find out more about that on decisionspace.com. Sorry, Jake. Bye.